What historical mystery is unlikely to ever be solved? What Pope Leo said to Attila the Hun? Attila was taking over the world and made it to Rome and the Vatican. Leo rode out alone and spoke to Attila and convinced Attila to not destroy Rome and the Vatican. What was said? Only the archives of the Vatican has any idea. Unfortunately, the answer is probably really mundane and disappointing. Like a lot of miraculous historical events, it probably boils down to the story is just bulls made up later. They could have just bribed the Huns. Italy and Rome weren't particularly rich by that time, so throwing a bunch of gold at them to spare them the time and energy of sacking it all could have worked. Or no conversation ever happened and it's a story developed later as a way for the church and the Pope to take credit. The Huns could have left for any other reason. Maybe the Pope did try to negotiate. It failed. But the Huns left after that anyway. Pope and church still take credit. Where the Sumerians came from. It's fascinating how the first people to invent writing and settle in great cities, Eridu, Uruk, speak a language totally unrelated to the languages of the people around them who spoke Semitic languages. A theory says they emerged out of the Ubaid culture and were indigenous to Mesopotamia, while another goes so far as to claim they came from the area of the Persian Gulf before it was flooded at the end of the last ice age. Some others believe they are related to the Indus Valley civilization, which they supposedly call Meluha. I agree it's an interesting problem, but it's also kind of what you'd expect. Most of the languages of that region were simply never recorded. It could have been an isolate at the time writing was being innovated, or it could have been part of a larger family with relatives in India or Africa. We aren't going to know because only the speakers in this one region were using that system, until it was adapted for language families centuries later like Akkadian or Hittite. And it's not like language isolates are truly isolate. All languages come from other languages. Go far enough back and Sumerian and Proto-Afro-Asiatic could have had a common source. Okay, probably not that particular pair, but you get the idea. Elamites another isolate from the period, but it could easily have a distant relationship to Dravidian or Caucasian families or something. And if it didn't, then it has a relationship with unknown languages. The Semitic speakers who conquered and integrated Sumer were themselves far removed from their language family's original homeland. What's more, their branch of Semitic, Eastern, is extinct. Sumerians' relatives could have just become extinct at a time before it was possible to record them. However, I do think it most likely that Sumerians were not indigenous to that delta. Their mytho-historical accounts of having traveled from a southern land notwithstanding, they appear to have had a different skin tone to their immediate neighbors. Linguistically, there is still much we don't know, but the large amount of homonyms suggests a tonal or pitch-accented system, which would also be innovative for the region. But, in case this is the reason for anyone's interest, I would stress that there is more than sufficient evidence that they innovated writing there, rather than having brought it with them from elsewhere. We have a good 5-6 centuries of proto-writing from them and can trace the origin of many cuneiform signs to pictographs on coins and tokens. A relationship with the Harappan civilization is non-existent, in my view. Indus Valley writing is proto-writing, and shares none of the characteristics of Sumerian proto-writing. A related mystery I'm keen on is whether writing was culturally diffused from Sumer to Egypt, or whether they were independent innovations. They are certainly independent systems, but they could have been a related or interdependent innovation early in the proto-writing stage that allowed their independent development. And they seem like neighbors, but there's no evidence of trade between them at this stage and people didn't travel that far without good reason. The missing men of Burmagit, NSW, Australia. 5 men disappeared in the 19th century, completely vanished off the face of the planet, with some very confusing things left behind. I'm tempted to do a YouTube video on it sometime, because so few people know this story, yet it's such a baffling one. Australian here, I've also never heard of it. Make the video. The disappearance of the Lake Fayum nomadic people that predated the pharaohs. They had no writing, no records of any form, and lived solely near the banks of the Nile and an ancient lake. They had a community for a long time that included bakeries, agriculture, weaving, and some precursor to religious or artistic elements. One day, the people vanished. They left their fish in the cooking pots, dry food stored under the floorboards of their houses, and pottery still on the wheel. It was like they were picked up and carried away, or the people suddenly left in a hurry and left everything behind. Then shortly after, The material culture of early pre-pharaonic Egyptian kingdoms arose. Some believe the Phaeacial migrated north to become the early Egyptians because of unusually arid conditions. Others say they were killed or captured, but there were no signs of struggle, they possessed and left no weapons. And that doesn't explain why the people left their entire culture intact. Most serial killer cases, unfortunately, shows portray cold cases as being more of interest to investigators when they aren't. D.B. Cooper, Jack the Ripped, Madeleine McCann, etc. are likely going to be unsolved for most of time. The Sea Peoples. A group of people show up randomly just in time to see the Bronze Age collapse and then frick off and are never heard from again. Where did they come from? Where did they go? Where did they come from, Cotton-Eyed Joe? My money's on the sea. I'm going to go in a much different direction and say what the origin of language was like. We obviously don't know anything that isn't written down, and relatively speaking, that time period is quite recent. We can probably get an estimation of which points grunts became words just by looking at biology if we're lucky enough to have a well-preserved specimen, but we'll never know what the first full set of words sounded like. I read some stuff about this recently. The idea that our conscious or self-awareness didn't start until we got a firm grasp on language. The disappearance of MH370. Even if they do find the plane or what's left of it, it's been so long that the black box won't be any use to anybody, so we will never really know for sure what happened. Believe it or not, the black box might still be useful. Honeywell makes a lot of flight recorders, including for Boeing, and they're tested to 20,000 featuring ocean depth, can survive brief exposure to fire and extreme shock loads. They're not designed to sit on the ocean floor indefinitely, but considering the bell curve of performance, it's likely if we found it we could still read it. Rasputin. Even if he took the king's son off his aspirin to help his hemophilia, how did he know to do that? How did he even get so close with the royal family without anyone raising an eyebrow until it became completely public? Did Tsar Nicholas's advisories see nothing wrong with a homeless wizard being associated with the Tsar? How did he really die, or how did he live the shot and poison if that story's true? Just so many questions lost to time. At this point, I feel like the Delphi murders will never be solved. Even if the scene was contaminated and not properly investigated, I truly believe that the real story is interwoven with some serious seedy crap involving her and other agencies. Einstein's last words. Nobody knows what they were because the nurse taking care of him didn't speak German. Big lack of foresight there, lol. I forgot to carry the 2. If we're talking historical, that is a long time ago, I'd have to say Hinterkaifeck. Yes, it's been covered a lot but still very fascinating. The guy in a Max Headroom mask that hijacked a Doctor Who broadcast in, I believe, Chicago in the 80s. To this day no one knows who it is. Oh, this is a good one. Probably gonna wind up as a deathbed confession, as he can still wind up in jail. There is a huge ancient temple in South India with vaults full of treasure that have been locked since God knows when. Historians tried opening a few and it is said that those who entered the vault were never the same after they came back. I would love for someone to solve the mystery, but for now government has sealed it away forever. I just needed a 100% truth to making a murderer. Would have been fine guilty or not. Just wanted an oh, yep, there's the evidence moment for whoever did it. The Indus Valley script. Deciphering it could unearth a lot of information into the formation of early India, which is largely unknown. Only mitochondrial DNA evidence is really available, and the Bronze Age. Why the new emperor of China ordered Zheng He's fleet and all mention of him to be burned after he died a mysterious death. What really happened to my biological grandfather the day he drowned in Lake Bde Marcuscar, formerly Lake Calhoun, in MPLS, MN 1953. Johnny Gaussian. What killed Heather O'Rourke? Technically we may know or can speculate about some details, but I doubt the full truth will ever come out. Heather O'Rourke was killed by bad doctoring. She had an obstruction or perforation or something in her colon that was mishandled by doctors, and that's what killed her. The exact burial site of Genghis Khan. I watched a documentary about this on Curiosity Stream a little while back. There's a good plausibility that Genghis Khan and a handful of his descendants were buried under a mound at the top of his favorite mountain, Burkhan Khaldun. He sheltered on that mountain after he had to run away as a child, and he declared it sacred. To this day you need special permission by the governments to even get close to it. It was very interesting. There are too many unsolved cases involving children. The Beaumont children are the main ones in Australia, though a few years later 2 young girls were kidnapped from Adelaide Oval, possibly by the same person, though we'll never know for sure. The most likely suspect is dead. I remember hearing a story about the Beaumont case. I think it went something like a detective was writing a book on the case decades after the fact. He starts researching a suspect who was now deceased, goes to the house where he used to live and interviews his widow. While there, he goes to the basement and finds a purse that matched the description of one that was owned by one of the missing girls that was never found. When he asks the widow where the purse was from, she tells him to leave. The next day, when he gets permission to seize the purse, the wife says she threw it away. I believe the suspect was Arthur Stanley Brown, who was mentioned in another comment. There were some other compelling anecdotes as well, with his supposed tendency to pay people with $1 notes. I want it to be solved, but it's seemingly more and more unlikely each day. D.B. Cooper. My money is on Ted Braden. If you could invent a D.B. Cooper suspect, you'd invent Ted Braden. Check it out. Braden was a paratrooper in World War II, jumped on D-Day with the 101st at age 16, Korea, and Vietnam. He won multiple international skydiving competitions while a member of the Army. 911 log jumps with the military and was a pioneer of halo jumping. Was recruited to be a team leader in the MACV SOGs. This was the predecessor to Delta Force and was a multi-service covert military special force run by the CIA. Led squads on covert jumps into Laos, Cambodia, and northern Vietnam from 64-67. Did many of these jumps into enemy territory off the aft stairs of, that's right, Boeing 727s. At the time of the skyjacking, the only people who knew this could be done were those involved in these MACV SOG missions and some employees at Boeing. Was always bitching about how he and his fellow soldiers weren't paid enough. Was always coming up with schemes to make extort steal money while in the service. In 1967, he heard about how people were looking for mercenaries to fight in the Congolese Civil War and how well they would be paying. So he went AWOL from Vietnam and made his way to the Congo. The CIA went after him and eventually found and arrested him in the Congo. Was imprisoned at Fort Dix for a very brief time and mysteriously was never convicted of anything, nor tried, and was merely given an honorable discharge and told that he couldn't re-enlist in the military. Once released, he tried to go overseas to be a mercenary again and found out that his name had been blacklisted by the CIA, and so he wasn't allowed to leave the country to be a mercenary. Not knowing how to make a living other than by being a soldier, he resorted to being a truck driver. His trucking company was stationed out of Vancouver. Interesting. When the Cooper hijacking happened, several members of the military contacted the FBI and essentially said this can only be Ted Braden. Braden had no family, so there wasn't anyone around who in retrospect said, hey, Dad wasn't around during Thanksgiving 1971. His alibi was that he was driving his truck. On the plane, Cooper was by everyone who remembered him as being middle-aged or mid-40s. Braden was 44. Cooper was described as being 5 feet 8, 5 feet 10 and slight. Braden was 5 feet 9 and 150 pounds. Cooper was described as being somewhat olive-skinned and swarthy. Braden's mother's side was Sicilian. Cooper was extremely calm the entire time. The only time he showed any emotion was when he was arguing with the pilots because he wanted to take off from Seattle with the stairs down. They didn't think it could be done. Cooper told them it absolutely could be done and he demanded it be done. The pilots simply refused to do so, thinking it would cause the plane to crash, and Cooper eventually relented. Braden was described by many of his military colleagues and commanding officers as one of the calmest people under fire you could imagine. Cooper smoked Raleigh cigarettes and so did Braden. Cooper was described by both flight attendants who spoke with him as having either a Midwestern accent or no accent. Braden was from Ohio. Cooper chose the military parachute over the more modern sport parachute. When asked by the flight attendant why he was doing this, he replied, "I don't have a grudge against your airline, miss. I just have a grudge." Braden certainly had a grudge against the government for blacklisting him from the only work for which he was skilled at, being a soldier. The alias Dan Cooper. Dan Cooper was the name of a popular 50s and 60s French language comic book series. The hero, Dan Cooper, skydived into areas to fight the bad guys. What is a country whose official language is French? The Congo. If Braden was Cooper, then it's extremely plausible that he was exposed to this comic series while serving in the Congo. Following the hijacking, recent investigation shows that in 1972, despite being a truck driver, he bought his mother a new car as well as a new car for himself, and that he was living in a freaking penthouse in Manhattan. He was arrested in the mid-70s for a major racketeering job in the trucking industry, but like his mysterious release from going AWOL, he was once again given a slap on the wrist and the charges were dropped. His personality: he was always a loner and never had close friends in his life. Men he served with would later say that when they would go to the bars, Braden would sit at the end of the bar by himself just seeming to sulk. A Green Beret who served with him stated Braden is among those professionals who appear to have a secret death wish coupled with well-trained instincts for survival. He continually placed himself in unnecessary danger but always managed to get away with it. Another Special Forces member stated he was the perfect combination of high intelligence and criminality. Military tests that he took for entrance into the MACV SOGs indicated that he likely possessed a genius-level IQ. Couple things to consider. Jumping out of a freaking jumbo jet is no small potatoes. Many of the famous Cooper suspects had been static line paratroopers in World War II or even had no known skydiving experience at all. You'd need to have mega balls to jump out of a jet and also have the skill set to do it. Perhaps most critically, you'd need to know that it could even be freaking done in the first place. There were several Cooper copycats who successfully pulled off similar skyjackings of 727s in the months after Cooper, but to be the guy who first did it? That takes someone special. The suitcase bomb. While this is a common trope you see in movies these days, it wasn't so in 1971. The whole concept of a suitcase bomb required some ingenuity. His calmness is especially noteworthy when you consider that the subsequent copycats were nervous wrecks during their skyjackings, despite being badasses in their own right. Richard McCoy won a Distinguished Flying Cross and a Silver Star in Vietnam as a chopper pilot. He literally flew hundreds of sorties as a chopper pilot, yet during his skyjacking he was noted, even before he started the skyjacking, for being fidgety and sweating and breathing heavy. Rob Heddy also successfully pulled off a 727 skyjacking. He was a 21-year-old Vietnam paratrooper who served 2 tours in the thickest fighting in Vietnam, and yet he later described himself as being barely able to breathe during his skyjacking. Cooper, on the other hand, sat calmly for 5 hours, smoking cigarettes and drinking his bourbon and coke. With one hand on the detonator, the flight attendant lit his cigarettes for him. It's also worth noting that none of the copycats gave any specific instructions to the pilots on how to fly the 727. They just jumped out with the jet going full speed and it nearly killed 2 of them. What Cooper told the pilots wasn't public knowledge at the time. Cooper told them to fly at 180 knots, wheels down, with flaps at 15 degrees, and at 10,000 feet. That's mighty specific and strongly indicates that Cooper had knowledge of how best to safely parachute out of a 727. Cooper was also the only one to not be caught. Getting caught on his missions with Spec Ops meant certain death. This is a man who knew how to escape situations and blend into his environment. Occam's razor would point toward Ted Braden being DB Cooper. One of the military's most experienced skydivers is kicked out of the service and isn't allowed to pursue a lucrative career as a mercenary, so he uses the skills that the military taught him to ransom $200K from the government. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.